As you are speaking, you have 15 minutes. I will put a 2-minute warning in the chat when you are at 2 minutes to go. If you personally would like more of a warning with like a 5-minute warning, just let me know before you start talking. And we will go ahead and get into our next speech, which is Quadruple Consciousness, the Transatlantic Experiences of Black LGBTQ+ Students in Higher Education Institutes, a comparative study, UK, US, and South Africa by Wasuk Sule-Pearce. And so we will turn it over to her.
So hi, everyone. I'm just going to try and share my screen. Just bear with me, please. There we go. Just bear with me, please. Okay. So yeah, introduced ourselves. I just want to say thank you so much to the team for inviting me here to present. I'm really, really excited. Just want to move this out of the way if that's possible. Can you all see my screen? Yeah?
Yes.
Brilliant. Yeah, so I just, first things first, I'm dyslexic. And Luganda is my first language. This is a language you speak in Uganda. So just please do bear with me if my accent, as we say in the UK, does not tickle your fancy. So the title of my research is Quadruple Consciousness, the Transatlantic Experiences of Black LGBTQ+, who are referred to as BLGBTQ+ students in higher education. And you might hear me refer to this population as my co-authors. So it's a comparative study. I look at the experience in the UK, US, and South Africa. And overall, I will look at the student transatlantic experience, where I interrogate and ask who is Black. I interrogate the church, Jim Crow and apartheid, the color bar and color line, and I also look at capitalism. So the second part of my research looks at the student quadruple consciousness, where I look at labels, representation, a safe space, funding, and go into a little bit of politics. And you're going to have to bear with me. I won't have a conclusion because this is just my preliminary findings. So the aim of my research is to advance our knowledge of how race, sexual orientation, and gender identity development impact a Black LGBTQ+ students' ability to successfully navigate different communities on campus. And the questions I'm trying to answer are, what factors support a student's race, sexual orientation, and gender identity development? And then how does this development impact how the student accesses the white and non-white communities and the heterosexual and non-heterosexual communities on campus? And then hopefully we can look at what best practices out there and how we can transfer it to the other institutions. When I talk about the transatlantic experience, in this figure, this is where the comparative aspect of my research lays. In blue, we have the shared student transatlantic experience, which is shaped by the legacy of the church, capitalism, slavery, and colonialism, all of which are part of the fabric in the UK, US, and South Africa. In yellow, we have racism as it is situated in all three of these countries. When we look at Jim Crow and apartheid, these were both backed by law in the US and South Africa, giving rise to the historically Black college universities and predominantly white institutions, which were established to serve the Black, and white communities, respectively. And when we have a sneak peek into the HBCU students, we know that they played a critical role in the civil rights movement in the 50s, 60s, and 70s here in the US. And in the 80s and early 90s, these same students were at the forefront of the fight against apartheid in South Africa. So we see the calabash specifically in the UK, which led to segregation in education, in accommodation, and career prospects. And I'll give you an example. A Black nurse in the NHS in the 50s and 60s could only attain a state-enrolled qualification as opposed to becoming a state-registered nurse. And what happened is this impacted their promotion prospects and their ability to probably return home and become a professional. And I locate the color line specifically in South Africa, where it was created to protect the purity of the white group. And this played a significant role in the structuring of apartheid. So again, this transatlantic experience, the age of enlightenment, theological doctrine of special creation, and the concept of species, among other pseudo-science racist ideologies, have been attributed to the creation of this concept that we call race. Racial labels have been used as a political weapon by the dominant group, whites, to retain other subject groups, such as Black people, in subjection. People are described as if they were on a yardstick, with Black inferiority at the bottom to give rise to white supremacy at the top. And the closer one is to white, the better off they are. This weapon is still being used today in countries such as the US and the UK to control, oppress, and discriminate against anyone deemed to fit this definition. So furthermore, capitalism of the 18th century developed the wealth of Europe by means of slavery, the Industrial Revolution, and colonialism, all of which elevated countries such as the UK to Great Britain. But thinking about capitalism, when we look at campaigns such as Rhodes Must Fall in South Africa and the UK, these have highlighted the legacy and influence of white supremacists and imperialists such as Cecil Rhodes, whose trust funds some of the top and most prestigious universities in the world today. Rhodes funds scholarships for students from Germany, the US, and the former British colonies. And I guess the question is, which universities and students benefit from such funding? Is it HBCUs, PWIs, Ivy League, Russell Group, or post-1992 modern universities? But also, what is the impact on research funding and career prospects of students from these universities across the globe? Now, some of my co-authors have highlighted that universities are big business today, with a high return on investment enjoyed at the top of management and low return for these students. Some are buying a false promise in courses with no value, leaving them in debt, with degrees and diplomas awarded that have no academic credentials, which negatively impacts their progression, career, and their lives. So we look at the second part of my research, which goes in to look at the quadruple consciousness. And I want to highlight that I adopted Mitchell's theory of quadruple consciousness. And in this figure, we see the 4 states of consciousness, identities 1, 2, 3, and 4, that a Black LGBTQ+ student has to navigate in higher education. My co-authors reported that they struggle socially because of the intersections of race, sexual orientation, and gender identity. A significant number reported that race and not their sexual orientation or gender identity affects their day-to-day interactions with faculty, staff, and students. The majority were separated from identities 1 and 2 out of choice, except when accessing lectures, well-being, and other services on campus. And they tell me that this resulted in a negative impact on both their sexual orientation, both their sexual orientation and gender identity, as well as their Black identity development. So those who assimilated within the Black community, which is identity 3, had to suppress their sexual orientation or gender identity. And as a result, the focus was on the development of their Blackness. Those, the optimum, sorry, I beg your pardon. Quadrant 4, identity 4 was the optimum because my co-authors had a close circle of Black LGBTQ Black friends, and as they describe it, who they could sit in it with. They report a positive impact on their sexual, their gender, and their Black identity development. This quadrant report higher self-esteem, support, and levels of life satisfaction in comparison to any of the other quadrants. So a significant number of Black people across the globe are religious, and true to this, most of my co-authors were raised in Christian households, with some going to church every Sunday. So as I continue to explore quadruple consciousness, I discover that the Bible is the foundation on which my co-author's family operated, and in some cases, the main supports network. However, some of these religious institutions can be homophobic and stigmatize LGBTQ people, which is harmful to their mental health. Interestingly, some reported applying religious behavior to counter negativity. Things like do not judge, forgive, pray for your aggressor, to mention but a few, helped my co-authors see the good in difficult situations. And a small number that I interviewed reported attending religious universities, which had a negative impact on their sexual and gender identity development. However, these same spaces provided support, which was attributed to better health outcomes. Again, we're still on quadruple consciousness, and some of my co-authors adopted spirituality as an alternative. And they believed in a higher being. They practiced religion in a unique way, choosing sections of the Bible that worked for them to incorporate into their day-to-day lives. Here they could integrate, which was positive for their sexual, their gender, and their Black identity development. However, they lost the church community, which was a network that some turned to when dealing with racism. A small number adopted traditional African beliefs, which was positive for their Blackness and mental health, but wasn't for their sexual and gender identity development. Some of my co-authors reported that progressive church was a space where they could integrate their identities. Again, this was the optimum because it had a positive impact on their mental health, their Black, their sexual, and their gender identity. I also explored how my co-authors self-identified and where they obtained the knowledge. Some say they looked to self-education. Some were enrolled on gender and sexuality courses, looked to their surroundings, their friendships or inner circle, the internet, and media. This was positive for their identity development. However, the pro-American Eurocentric focus was damaging for their self-esteem and overall mental health outcomes. Now, a significant number reported difficulty identifying a support network on campus among faculty, staff, and administrators with lived experience. And this would have had a negative impact on their self-esteem, mental health outcomes, and as a result, impacted their Black, sexual, and gender identity development. So I have a question. When you think about the Black community, homophobia and transphobia, what comes to mind? But also, what do we think about, for example, Dwayne Wade, dedicating the NAACP Image Awards to his daughter, Zaya? So some of my co-authors reported intentionally seeking out Black people and societies on campus, but were stigmatized and discriminated against because of their sexual orientation and gender identity. This resulted in poor mental health outcomes, and without that support system, some were left to face racism on their own. So still on quadruple consciousness, I have another question. When you think about a Black LGBTQ+ student navigating the LGBTQ community, what comes to mind? Again, some of my co-authors who are openly lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, or queer reported negative experiences while navigating the LGBTQ society on campus. And this is because they were subjected to racism from their white peers. So as a result, some of them avoided this space altogether. Some sought out Black LGBTQ+ students for support, but these support circles were small. My co-authors who were openly lesbian, gay, bisexual, who weren't open, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, or queer, reported avoiding the LGBTQ community on campus altogether because they were terrified they might be outed. And this had a negative impact on their sexual and gender identity development, their self-esteem, and overall mental health and academic outcomes. Now, I want to switch it a little bit and turn to politics. Remember, I'm not a political expert, but some of my co-authors reported having hope because they have seen in their lifetime the first Black woman appointed to the Supreme Court. However, the same Supreme Court overturned Roe and Wade. And my co-authors ask this question: is same-sex marriage next? And with events such as the January 6th attack on Capitol Hill, some fear they might have to go back into the closet for fear of their safety. And this would negatively impact their development and outcome. So finally, some of my co-authors reported being harmed by the people that run universities, who claim to be apolitical, but will not confront racist donors in order, as some of them put it, to keep the lights on. Give an example of a university that invites college Republican speakers who promote Nazi propaganda. And this will impact their Blackness and self-esteem. Some also talked about finding difficulties in accessing scholarship. And we know in the UK that a big chunk of research money goes to Russell Group universities, which admit majority white and middle-class students. So this is as far as I got to with my preliminary findings. Like I said earlier, I don't have a conclusion because that's to come. But for those that are interested in learning more about my research, here are my details. And anyone that's publishing or thinking about writing, please consider the Global Journal of Black Sexuality and Gender Studies as your home for your work. But also anyone that wants to join the conversation, we do hold a global Black LGBTQ chat on the last Wednesday of every month. So please contact me via email, my socials, or wherever, if you need more information about this. We're actually meeting this coming Wednesday on the 29th at, I think it's 12 p.m. CST. So thank you so much for listening. Can't wait for the questions.
Thank you, Wasuk. We really did appreciate your presentation. So moving on to the next presentation, we have performances of digital care labor and social disparities enacted in campaigns of digital crowdfunding to cover medical expenses. by Brenda Marques. So Brenda, we will be turning it over to you.
Thank you, Sawyer. Can everybody listen to me? Well, okay, thank you. I'm just gonna set up my screen. Okay. Like Sawyer said, my paper focused on disparities enacted in campaigns of digital crowdfunding to cover medical expenses in the United States. And I think it's better to start by defining what is medical crowdfunding. And I define medical crowdfunding as a form of digital fundraising in which internet users they engage in websites through their website participation and are able to launch online crowdfunding campaigns to cover their medical bills, home care expenses, expenses related to medicine, treatments. And one of the reasons why I was interested in this topic, it was based on my own experience while living in the United States. And I'm from Brazil, where the healthcare system is completely different from the way that it takes shape here. And I've noticed that within my own community that lives in Austin, immigrant community of Brazilians, medical crowdfunding was an essential part of how people would acquire resources and find ways to survive here. So I would constantly see campaigns going through social media, campaigns based in the United States, based in Austin, but written in Portuguese, Spanish. So this made me very interested in understanding what was going on in terms of social disparities. What can we learn from medical crowdfunding, digital platforms in terms of healthcare precarity, and how potential social disparities of gender, race, and ethnicity might take shape in this digital environment. For my study, and this is a work in progress, it's part of my master thesis, but it's still ongoing. I selected the website GoFundMe because it's the biggest platform for crowdfunding charity in the country, and also the world leader in medical crowdfunding. And the platform started in 2010, and a lot of authors argue that the rise of medical crowdfunding emerges as a response to the financial crisis of 2008. So there is also this connection with the way that capitalism is shaping precarity in people's lives, being mirrored in digital platforms as well. As for my research goals, I intend to examining the gendered and racial politics behind medical crowdfunding platforms, in this case GoFundMe. This study is also an examination on the performances of digital care labor, and I'll talk about what digital care labor means in this study. And I look at the performance of digital care labor that are enacted by medical crowdfunding campaign organizers or users. And I look at the campaigns in the United States through this website. I also reflect on the different ways the access of gender, race, and gender normativity shape experience of inequality in digital technologies and might probably mirror sets of groups' disadvantaged positions from the offline world. In terms of my theoretical framework, this work is situated with feminist science and technology studies and feminist science and technology literature. And a lot of our authors would argue that we should articulate the ways hierarchies of gender and race differentiation are also embedded in technology, given that technologies are not neutral nor disembodied. I also hope this study can open like new dialogues for us to think about how social technical configurations of technological designs are often based on white cis-normativity, but at the same time, in the case of medical crowdfunding, those processes, they shape understandings and values of care and care labor. Um, and digital labor, I contend that under certain circumstances, internet users, they will build a virtual space through constant content production in which capital accumulation relies on. So rather than just consumers, internet users from different platforms often perform what is called unpaid labor. And this unpaid labor is essential for capital accumulation and the communication technologies. The term care here is also central to this study, given the emotional affordances and the invested effects that are related to the emotional labor of campaign organizing and navigating health precarity in the United States. That's why I use not only the term digital labor, but digital care labor, with the care aspect being a feminist account on the invisibility of emotional investments that have been explained by feminist literature. So often, even in digital environments, women will be investing their emotional energy to engage with and generate content that in turn adds value to branded for-profit platforms. Um, a last theoretical alignment of my work is with the framework of race critical code studies and techno-liberalism in science and technology studies. Those two frameworks will help me situate the fact that online interactions for medical crowdfunding in the United States are not race neutral, are not gender neutral, nor post-labor structured. Hence, authors such as Benjamin will argue that whiteness will work as a default setting in innovation discourses and technological systems in the United States, and that we often should look at how technologies can hide, speed up, or even reinforce racism and stratify many forms of injustice that have been already experienced by members of racialized groups. So in the sense, this work tries to analyze how whiteness and cisgender heterosexual normativity emerge and interact to become the default setting in medical crowdfunding as well. In terms of data or like my resources I have used, I access two sets of findings. I look at the Kinworth et al. And Barcelos and Bode studies. Those are the two first large sample works documenting distribution and determinants of medical crowdfunding to discuss inequality. The first study looks at race and gender disparity in campaign organizing. And the first study has a very large sample, but doesn't really include or has a very small portion of what would be called non-cisgender medical crowdfunding. And the second study is focused on gender for affirming care and has a sample majorly based on transgender users. So I looked at those two studies as they were offering different results. The first one looking at race and gender disparity, and the second one looked at race and gender normativity to understand why some campaigns are more funded than others, who is doing the digital labor of campaign organizing on behalf of others for medical crowdfunding, and how even users' identities and identifications are shaping the platform and notions of care and health precarity. Okay. Some of the findings that I encountered while looking at those two sets of data were the underrepresentation of Black campaign organizers and recipients in comparison to white organizers. So this was prevalent in both studies, and it showed somewhat a novel development in medical crowdfunding platforms, considering that the platform GoFundMe has a very strong discourse of social justice and racial justice, encouraging users to perform like donations in the name of Black joy and Black well-being. So it was very interesting to see that when we look at the demographics of the users and campaign and donors, Black campaign organizers and recipients are not prevalent. Also, this questioned the intuitive assumption that Black and other racial minorities who are already in a disadvantaged position, the healthcare system in the United States, would be the primary users and recipients of resources on crowdfunding platforms. And at this point, I was trying to incorporate an intersectional analysis into this data. And in both studies, in the first study, which focused much more in cisgender population, 67% of the campaign organizers were women, and 80% of them were campaign organizing on behalf of their loved ones. So the digital care labor that emerges at this point was very much focused on white women, campaign organized on behalf of friends and family. But when we look at the campaign recipients, there were 80% men. And men were more likely to receive funds when they were campaign recipients than women. And specifically, this says that one of the main beneficiaries of medical crowdfunding in the United States, according to the first study, is a white cisgender man who is more likely to raise more funds than any other group in a platform. When we look at transgender users and gender affirming care for medical related to medical crowdfunding, we see a different scenario in which 9% of the recipients are also the campaign organizers, which means that there is a shift in the dynamics of digital care labor with transgender communities and transgender people performing digital care labor on behalf of themselves and advocating for themselves to secure gender affirming care. In this case, another interesting finding was the fact that trans white men made 70% of the sample, and the fact that white binary identified trans men were actually the main beneficiaries of medical crowdfunding in gender affirming care. So those two sets of findings already show that the demographics of the users and the way that donors perform their support in a platform are shaped by understandings of race, gender normativity, and of sex. Yeah, I think I don't have time anymore. Do I have time still? 1 minute. Okay. Okay. Yeah. And I think for my master's thesis, what I'm doing now is to look at doing more qualitative analysis, and I'm actually looking at the campaigns and how users have been framing their own notions of care and their own notions of health precarity in the United States. Because for a lot of reasons, in the case of medical crowdfunding for gender affirming care, a lot of users are very aware of the transgender exclusions performed by medical providers and the discrimination faced in Texas when they try to access healthcare services. And with the large sample unrelated to gender affirming care, a lot of users struggle to express their own understandings of health precarity. So there's a lot of discourses about citizenship, American values, family values, and how their bodies are worth of receiving help and accessing healthcare services. But with this not being a failure of the healthcare system in the United States. So yeah, I think I will end here. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Brenda. We really appreciated your